Hi, I'm Bella Shapiro. I'm the project lead for the Uber versus Didi case for TCA number one.
Nick Crosha, I'm assistant project lead.
My name is Barrett King.
And I'm Daniel Griven. So with that, let's get started. So after reading the Uber versus Didi case, we decided that the strategic issue was how can Uber gain more market shares versus a competitor with a similar service in the Chinese market? So how did we get here? Well, Uber initially started because calling a taxi cab could be extremely difficult. And Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp wanted to make this process as easy as clicking a button. Now, Uber became super popular in the US, and they were always looking to expand into unknown markets. Now, one of these causes is that Uber is expanding into unknown markets, but also creating competition for local companies. And for this case, this would be in China, and the company is Didi. Now, the conclusion was that as Uber continued to grow, they were having problems in this unknown market, and they needed to decide. They needed to partner with a local company. This company is Baidu. They decided to get a better understanding of the market. Now, before that, Didi had a local advantage and was partnered with big tech companies in China. But then Uber decided to kind of follow that path and Uber partner with Baidu, and because Google Maps was having problems in China. Now, once Uber partnered with Baidu, they had a better understanding and better software for the Chinese market. Now, for the strategic issue, we decided the condition Uber and Didi are competing for a competitive advantage in the Chinese market. Didi is trying to prevent Uber from taking over the Chinese market, and Uber is expanding into a new market where there's growth, but there's also competition. Now, some of the implications for not addressing the issue is that Uber could be missing out on a huge emerging market, and also that Didi could also have a huge competitive advantage if Uber did not enter the market. Now, one of the biggest metrics that we have is that Didi had control of 99.8% of the market before Uber had entered. And when Uber had entered into the competition, they had a local competing company as well. And this company's name was Kudadi. Now, before they were fighting, they didn't have as much market share, and they decided to merge on actually February 14th, 2015. And once they merged, they joined and were called Didi Kudadi Joint Company and eventually had control of 99.8% of the market. Now I'm going to pass it off to Barrett to give us the financials.
Thank you, Daniel. So going into the key financial and strategic quantitative indicators, going off of what Daniel had mentioned, Uber China first rolled out in 2013, but had to compete in a very vicious market as Didi, the main competitor, had 99.8% of the market share, as Daniel had mentioned. As Uber entered the market, as of June 2015, Uber China had about 12% of the market share, whereas Didi had around 80% of completed requests. So this really shows how large Didi still is and kind of how much of the market that they control. Going into the funding that the two companies received recently, Uber China received about $1.2 billion to expand in China and Asia Pacific as a whole, which really would help to compete against Didi. More recently, they received additional funding in 2016 of about $3.5 billion from the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, which would really continue to help Uber China capitalize on the market that they're in. On the other hand, Didi received about $3 billion from tech internet giants such as Apple, Tencent, and Alibaba to expand beyond China and also partner with global competitors, which would be very negative for Uber China. At this time, Uber China was valued at about $7 billion, whereas Uber US is valued at $62 billion. And Didi at this time was valued at about $25 billion. So that really continues to show how large of an operation compared to Uber China Didi is. And this is regardless of the fact that Uber China, as of 2016, was losing about $1 billion per year, even with the fact that Uber China accounted for around 50% of total Uber trips per year. So going to the next slide, looking at the internal and external forces of Uber entering into the Chinese market. So we decided to kind of focus with a SWOT analysis, going more in depth on the internal and external forces that the SWOT focuses on. This is starting out with strengths, which is the first internal force that I'm going to talk about. Some strengths that Uber China has is, as Daniel had mentioned in the beginning, the partnership with Baidu, which really helps Uber China to understand the Chinese market with a local partner and kind of continue to help with their goal in creating a competitive advantage in the market. Uber also has a vast, diverse offerings, which is good for the competition compared to Didi. Next, going to the next internal force weaknesses. There are still a lot of pro-taxi individuals in China, as well as globally, but when these individuals are going more towards taxi opposed to online rideshare or ride booking apps, that would be negative for any sort of rideshare or booking app company. Reliance on drivers volunteering for Uber is also a weakness. Instead of Uber hiring, it's more the individual going to Uber to drive for the company. Now looking at the external forces, starting with opportunities, China being one of the largest and most populous countries in the world, has seen a lot of urbanization in the past years, which leads to longer commute times and more individuals looking to utilize rideshare or a ride taxi booking app such as Uber or Didi. Mobile phone prices have decreased and the overall mobile internet has increased for individuals, which means that they would be able to utilize apps such as Uber China, which is a great opportunity for a large population country such as China. Lastly, the final external force within the SWOT is threats. The main threat would be the global competition, as Didi has collaborated with Lyft and Ola, as well as just these companies competing with Uber as a giant in general. And then lastly, governmental differences. China and the US have always had an interesting relationship, and that can come into play as Uber is a US-based company. Now I'm going to pass it to Bella to talk about the analysis tools.
Great. So to do a further analysis on Uber, we did the VRIO analysis as well as Porter's 5. So jumping right in, first, it's important to note the strategic issue at hand, which is Uber is trying to figure out how to penetrate the Chinese market, especially the ride-sharing market, amongst competitors like Didi. So first, I want to talk about the resource of Uber's brand image. This is extremely critical to Uber as they're looking to gain market share. First, I want to talk about the value. Their brand is valuable. It's a sense of credibility globally, and it's well recognized. Similar to how Google is, it's used as a verb, like let's Google it, let's go Uber it. Secondly, they are difficult to imitate with their brand image. It's taken years for Uber to build the scale of who they are as a ride-sharing service, both in the US where they started and globally where they continue to expand exponentially. The scale is something that Chinese ride-sharing apps like Didi cannot imitate because, one, it takes time as well as many resources that they just don't have yet. Third, I want to talk about the rarity of their brand image. Uber was established in 2015 and continues to grow exponentially, being one of the fastest growing businesses after Facebook or Meta. And this remains prominent in the global sphere. And that is just something that's rare with a company in general, especially in the ride sharing industry. Lastly, their brand helps them with organizing to capture value. Again, it's taken years for the brand to grow at the scale that it has, and that has allowed it to establish credibility globally. And especially, we'll touch on this when we go into alternatives, but partnering with potential partners in the US, there's that credibility with the Uber brand, and that'll just help establish trust and possible beneficial partnerships moving forward, as well as because Uber is so well known, that helps with marketing costs and awareness, which all factors come together to help with sustainable competitive advantage. Second, I want to talk about Porter's 5 analysis, specifically threat of new entrants, as well as rivalry amongst existing competitors. The threat of new entrants is a weak force, which makes it good for Uber because they can focus on bigger competitors like Didi, opposed to constantly looking backward at new entrants that could be coming into the market and keeping up with them. Secondly, I want to touch on the rivalry amongst existing competitors like Didi. Yes, this is a force that is negative to Uber, as well as it applies pressure, but this pressure can be used to push Uber to innovate, especially because they have this well-known brand that is backed by a culture that is progressive and innovative. And these two combined help Uber use their brand name and innovate in order to get a step ahead and gain more market share in the Chinese market. Next, I want to go into our alternatives that we talked about now that we have a better view of who Uber is, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So first is our primary alternative, which is establishing partnerships with US corporations. And Nick will touch on that in the next slide with more details as to why we think that this best aligns with Uber's strategy in helping them with their strategic issue. But secondly, we want to talk about our secondary alternatives, like offering a variety in service offerings, as well as targeting a different demographic. So first, offering a variety in service offerings. That would be Uber mimicking what Didi is currently doing in the market, considering that Didi is one of the top players in the ride-sharing service in China. So that would be offering more than one service in hopes to widen who they're targeting in the market and help them get a better gain on penetrating the Chinese ride-sharing market. But we ultimately decided that it doesn't align with Uber's offering of rideshare, and it would also be a game of constant catch up with these top dog players like Didi, who already have a well-established foot in the door with the ride-sharing market. Secondly, targeting a different demographic. This kind of goes hand in hand with the alternative of offering a variety of service offerings, but looking at a market that isn't as well reached was something that we were aiming at with targeting a different demographic, like commuters going a short distance that don't necessarily want to hail a taxi or like a ride sharing service, but still would like to rent something to help them transport, like a scooter, for example. And that's something that Didi and other competitors don't do or isn't as popular. So that would be definitely a way to get in the door. But ultimately, it's risky because that is a smaller demographic, and that could be a financial risk that would ultimately hurt Uber, as well as it strays from the original goal of just being a ride sharing app in China. And next, Nick is going to go into establishing partnerships with US corporations.
So for our primary implementation plan, we are going to focus on Uber partnering with US corporations who have successfully infiltrated the Chinese market. And one that comes to mind is McDonald's. They're a fast food giant, and they have made a great name for themselves in the Chinese fast food industry. They found success domestically, and they infiltrated the Chinese market and now hold a large share in that target market segment. And Uber's plan would be to run a joint marketing campaign with hand in hand with McDonald's, where they'd run ads together. And this would be very beneficial for Uber and McDonald's, but in terms of Uber, they would be legitimized due to McDonald's loyal customers and the broad outreach they have. And they would both target the young teen and adult market segment, as that is primarily the users both using Uber and dining in McDonald's. And for implementation and assumptions, we would assume that Uber and McDonald's would like to get into the marketing business partnership together, and that Uber can pay for a marketing campaign of this size for strategic and financial objectives. We would hope to see Uber see an increase in the teen and young adult demographic on their app, and also potentially breaking even with the revenue spent on marketing and the revenue gained from this campaign. For investments that could possibly be needed, Uber may need to invest in the ad agency and would have to possibly invest in a marketing team. And for changes made in structures and systems, both Uber and McDonald's could offer limited time discounts, with Uber offering cheaper rides to McDonald's locations and McDonald's offering specialized meals. And to just cap everything off with our closing statement, Uber has found great domestic success, but now they are in waters that they have not previously been in the Chinese market, where they're now the small fish in the big sea. And a market landscape that is completely different to what they are familiar with back home. This raises questions of should they adapt, or should they stick to their guns of being a solely on-demand rideshare app? And through this, Uber will have to utilize tactics like SWOT, PESTLE, a bunch of analytics tools, along with testing, in order to see if they could potentially be profitable in this new market. Thank you.